this started in the preliminary. There we go. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for showing up. This is our Triangle of Power debate or open forum, Q&A, whatever you'd like to call it. It's kind of a mashup of all of that. Doctors Joshua Cotter, Evan Schick, and Kurt Escobar pretty soon will be joining us to talk with each other and answer our questions about really anything exercise science and maybe even anything PhD and researcher wise. And if they feel comfortable with it and you guys feel comfortable with it, maybe even personal questions, which we'll get into as well. So to start off, I have some quick rapid fire that I was hoping all three of you guys would be here for, but it's all right. Briefly, or even a yes, no answer, either is fine. And whoever wants to go first. First up, does lactic acid ever get created in the human body? Yes, no, or elaborate if you want, if you wish.
I assume this is meant for me. I'm just gonna assume it. I can't speak to other parts of the body, but in muscle, I assume your question is referring to muscles.
Yeah, exercise related, muscle related. Yes, there's still a little bit of misunderstanding or miscommunication about that being a cause of fatigue or even occurrence during exercise. So obviously you don't have to elaborate as you would in a classroom setting, but whatever you feel like sharing.
Strictly according to the PK value of lactate, no. Muscle isn't acidic enough to donate hydrogen, so there's not an acid that's formed. So there's not an lactic acid, but there is a lactate molecule that's formed. Whether the question about does it have to do anything from, does it have anything to do with, did you say fatigue or pain? What'd you say?
Really muscular fatigue or even pain following, exercise.
Really neither. Lactate is a good chemical. It's at worst, it's inert, but at best it's used for really, really positive stuff metabolically. So it doesn't contribute to fatigue at all. It doesn't have anything to do with the pain that you're feeling either acutely or afterwards, like a couple days afterwards.
Dr. Cotter, anything to
add? Question's a bit irrelevant based on what Dr. Schick said, whether or not we go through a brief moment or not, depending on acidity, of course. Lactate is the predominant thing we should be talking about. And in regards to whether or not it's good or bad, it's very, very good. As already stated, it's a fuel source that we can continue using, especially in our type 1 skeletal muscle with its oxidative capacity to continue it through things like the citric acid cycle. So yeah, it's a good thing. We want it around. Otherwise, if we didn't have the ability to create lactate, then we would experience fatigue probably a lot more quickly. So
awesome, thank you. At any point, by the way, if anybody has any questions, they can go ahead and just unmute and try to get their question heard, or even throw it in the chat, and one of the exec members will read that out for you so that the doctors can try to answer that. Continuing on, that was a little bit of a hardball in the beginning. Sorry about that. I mean, probably not to you guys, but it is still a point of contention sometimes in the current fitness world. Maybe a little bit on an easier note, what do you guys individually prefer, resistance training or cardio training, and why?
For real?
I know.
Right. That was my reaction.
Dude, look, some of us know the answers to this, but some of the newer students of yours who are still trying to get to know you don't know this. But yeah, go ahead, please.
I like resistance training. Always have, always will. I don't particularly like cardiovascular exercise, aerobic exercise, but I do it. For instance, my activity of choice lately is I live in a hilly area, so I walk the hills wearing a weight vest, anywhere from, depending on how I feel, 15 to 35 pounds or so, and I want to get it up higher and higher as my way of doing that kind of training. It feels harder, but yeah, I run pretty goofy for long distances, so you won't see me do it. I'm really clunky. I like sprinting, but yeah, it's all resistance training, and you can get, a lot of the research shows depending on how you resistance train, right? If you're doing like 1RM stuff all the time, that's maybe questionable. But if you're doing various kinds of resistance training, then you get a lot of the similar benefits health-wise that you would from aerobic type training. And a lot of that's coming about research in the last couple of decades, where in the past, a predominant amount of the research was done on cardiorespiratory work, which is why it was always the #1 recommendation. It is good, don't get me wrong, but not my cup of tea. Dr. Schick?
Yeah, well, you know that we're aligned with this too. I don't find myself doing much cardio. I do in quarantine, mostly as a matter of keeping myself sane and distracted for long periods of time, because I don't like to be alone with my thoughts, as I know many of you don't. I have been walking for long periods of time around my neighborhood, which is nice because I've actually learned that there are some really nice houses over here. It's a quaint little family-oriented neighborhood that I live in, and I've realized that from all the walking that I'm doing. It's low impact too, and I have 2 herniated discs in my lower back, so it's nice for my back. It burns the requisite calories that I need for losing pandemic weight. So I do walk, and certainly that's cardio. But I agree with Dr. Cotter. If I really am, if I'm going out and I'm trying to train for something aerobic, I'm doing weightlifting, I'm doing resistance exercise, but I'm designing it in a way that makes it more aerobic. So I'm moving faster pace. I'm lifting lighter weights, but moving very fast pace, very short rest periods, more in line with high intensity interval training. And like Dr. Cotter stated, most of the newer research states that imparts the strongest cardiorespiratory adaptations anyhow.
Awesome. Courtney.
Yeah, so for Dr. Cotter and Dr. Schick, what was a defining moment that made you want to teach?
Well, I know exactly. It was funny because many of you guys know I was a business major for my undergraduate degree, management information systems. And summer of my, right before my senior year, I had an internship with Nationwide Insurance, paid well, hated it, and decided at that point, I need to start exploring what I want to do for the rest of my life. And the quarter, we were on quarters, so 3 quarters a year. The quarter after that, I took an animal sciences class as part of our GE requirement. And it was, it required students to give a presentation. And I gave one on nutrition and the usage of animals in nutrition, basically whether or not to, we should incorporate animal products or not in the diet, positives and negatives. And after that presentation, the instructor, Dr. Stevens, stopped me and said, hey, have you ever thought about teaching? And I said, no, I haven't. Why? He said, you did a very good, good job with your presentation, and that's something I think you should consider. And I did. I considered that and started looking into programs and found there was an exercise science program, which actually I didn't know about that as an undergraduate, to be perfectly honest. And that's when I started my master's degree and PhD and all that, going down the route of teaching what I love, which is exercise and nutrition. And so it was that one professor. That's what I like about teaching too, is you can, as a professor, once in a while, you might get to a student in such a way that allows them to reach this turning point in their life, and they go down the path that they were meant to go along, the whole time. And you are just a small factor in getting them on that right track. And that's a wonderful feeling. So I'm glad Dr. Stevens did that for me, and I hope to do it for hopefully many students in the future.
That was great. I really liked listening to that, Dr. Cotter. Mine is similar in a couple senses. I also will say I like this line of talking about how it is that we came about our careers, because I think that physiology is great, but I think the most prescient thing for all of you is career choices. For me, it was my second semester in my master's program at Cal State Fullerton. Just because I needed money, I decided to apply to be a TA. And I did what you can do in our grad program here too, which is that I taught the Introduction to Weightlifting course for undergrads. I was a master's student, and I was teaching a class full of undergrads, the Introduction to Weightlifting class. And I remember the very first lecture, like I use lecture very loosely. It was basically like a 10-minute stand-up act that I ended up doing. And I had never really talked in front of a group of people. And at that time, I was only 22. And when I made everybody laugh in class, and this was a class of maybe 30 kids, all about my age, I made them laugh for the very first time. And I cannot tell you how empowering that made me feel. I could feel my blood coursing through my body. I'm not a religious person, but that was like spiritual to me. And later on that semester, I covered a lecture for my advisor, Dr. Coburn. And it was the same sort of thing. I had like just the best feeling. It was, again, so empowering. It was like a lightning bolt through my body. And after that class, when I covered Dr. Coburn's lecture, he was talking to me, and this reminds me of Dr. Cotter, because he said to me, he's like, if you liked it that much, then maybe this is something that you should pursue professionally. And so that was kind of the start of it. I asked him 1,000,001 questions about how to go about doing that, because I didn't know anything about how to become a professor. I didn't know barely what a PhD even was. He had to explain all that stuff to me. And so that was really what set it off in motion. It was that feeling of controlling a room, that empowering feeling of controlling a room. And I see it sometimes in you guys when you give presentations, when you've done well. And I like that. I like seeing in your face that you just did well. I'm going to second something else that Dr. Cotter said, that like a huge part of why we like being professors, being teachers, is that we get to work with you guys. And I've heard on more than one occasion from former students that when they're in their career, they often think, when they're posed with a problem at work, they'll think and they'll in their head, and they'll say, I wonder what Dr. Schick would do. And I cannot tell you how much that inspires me when I hear former students tell me that. That is the sole reason that I get up in the morning and do my job, is so that I can inspire you guys to live lives of integrity and to not bend and always do the right thing. So yeah, that's what I like about it too. I like these types of questions about career. Let's keep that going if we can.
Actually, in my normal life, when I'm posed with a difficult situation, I think the same thing. What would Dr. Schick do? What would Dr. Schick do? And I'm full of integrity for that. Thank you, Dr. Schick.
You're my man, Dr. Cotter. You know that. You guys all know that we're friends in real life, I assume.
That was just really wholesome. I do have to say that. And I love that you guys are actually friends. I think that's something that a lot of students don't realize, especially if we don't see that interaction. And with us being virtual, I think it's good to see how you guys connect. But with that, Dr. Schick wants to continue on with like talking about careers and stuff like that. I want to open up the floor to members. Any questions you guys might have about anything regarding their careers. I mean, this is a no holding back. And if you're too shy, just type it in the chat. I'll read it for you.
I'll throw a question.
I got one, Dr. Schick.
Oh, good.
Yeah, ladies first. We're good.
Okay, maybe it's short, maybe it's long, but I was just going to ask, obviously you guys have pretty extensive careers, so what would you say has been your biggest accomplishment to now?
Dr. Schick, you want to go first?
That's kind of a stunning question. I'm still thinking. I suppose I asked for this. Biggest accomplishment. I suppose this answer could change depending on my mood and depending on the day. I don't know that I have a biggest accomplishment, I certainly getting a job at Long Beach was a product of a ton of work that I had put in for years in trying to get to this type of place. And there's a fun story behind that Dr. Cotter hired me. He was the chair of the faculty search committee who that hired me. And Dr. Cotter, I don't want to talk for you, but the crazy thing is that Dr. Cotter you were in your first semester. He was in his first semester at Long Beach as a brand new professor. And he found himself, not by his own choice, but he found himself as the chair of this faculty search committee. And it was very special meeting Dr. Cotter. I really took that first meeting very seriously. I thought we got along really well, and I immediately was like, okay, this is where I got to be. And so that to me was an accomplishment, a huge one that has paid real big dividends time and time again. I would say there's sort of like a recurring big accomplishment, which is just every year when I see you guys during commencement, it's sort of like, again, one of these gifts that we get every year, getting to see you guys graduate and get those pieces of paper in your hand and getting to see you like at your happiest and meeting your parents. And I think that's a big accomplishment in my mind for me every year is when I get to meet your parents. It's a big, big, big deal for me to meet your parents. That's all I got. It's mostly about you guys. I'll be honest. That's most of my goal. I'm sorry for being so wholesome. I can't help it. It's just the way I'm wired. I'm done.
I'll agree with that, but let me start out with saying I have achieved a few accomplishments at the time I was very proud of. 3 years in at Long Beach, I won a university award, early academic career award. First faculty in kinesiology to ever win any university award. And I thought, you know, the world of that. I was so proud, and mostly because it was through the nomination of students that wrote letters that most likely had the biggest factor in that. So again, it goes back to the students. But being 3-4 years ago since I've had that, it really wasn't as big of a defining moment as I thought. And then last year, I got tenure, which maybe some of you guys know about, which is when professors get through this big review that we go through. And if you pass it, you get the title goes from assistant to associate. And in America, you really can't get fired after that unless you do something really, really bad, like really bad. Okay. And you might think that would have been a defining moment. And it was actually one of the most disappointing moments I've endured throughout my academic career for various reasons. But alongside of Dr. Schick's story, it's student related. And I can go to one specific student. I was actually a postdoc at UCI, and I was the postdoc for the space lab where we did space related research there. And I had about 4 to 6 biology students every year under my wing producing research with me. And there was this one girl, she was actually the sister of someone I had in the lab a couple of years earlier. So that was kind of cool, but she was not like her sister at all. She was very, very shy, timid. You could barely hear her when she talked. And she was in my lab for, 3 years. I had her, 2 or 3 years, I think almost 3 years though. And at the end of those 3 years, by the end, she ran her own study on her own, you know, with my support, conducted it very well, collected data, presented at this research competition at UC Irvine, and she won the Chancellor's Award for what she did in research. And now she is finishing, she's 4 or 5 years into med school over in Virginia, and she's doing a wonderful job there. But for me to see someone come in like that, and I remember sitting when it was live, and I was in the room she was presenting in, she was just so outgoing and so confident and just owned that room, just like Dr. Schick was talking about with teaching. You know when you did a good job, You have that glow to you. And she had that. I kid you not. I had a tear in my eye. I swear to God, I had a tear in my eye. I will be honest when I cry. I'm a pretty emotional guy. I felt like a proud father. And I know what that is because I am currently a proud father with her because we grew so much together. And I think that's the thing we really, and those are the critical moments is when we have a chance to grow with you guys as students. And we see you at commencement, or we hear that you got into school somewhere that you really wanted to, or you got this, high level career that you've always been dreaming of. Those are all the combined spirit experiences that are big moments. It's not a big moment like the ones I gave initially. Those actually pale in comparison to those student interactions that we have. So yeah, I kind of rambled on a little bit about that, but those are the little things that are really the biggest moments. And we continually look forward to having those each and every year. And we do get at least a few of them every year.
Ryan, I know you've had a question next, but I wanted to open the floor to Dr. Escobar now that he's joined us to answer the current question that Dr. Schick and Dr. Cotter just responded to. And then afterward, you can shoot your question.
Thank you. And I apologize. Los Angeles traffic is back, apparently. This is a big question. I don't know if I have one quite yet. I just started my third year. There's lots that I want to do. And I don't know if Dr. Schick and Dr. Cotter have mentioned this point or alluded to it, but there's a transition period of when you go from a grad student PhD program as a student in academia to a faculty in academia. And it's a whole different landscape that not really quite, I don't want to say not prepared for, but there's just it's a whole nother animal, assuming the position as professor. And so you kind of have to, I don't want to say change your goals, but you have to sort of reorientate your goals and let the current opportunities and constraints that exist, not limit you, but at the same time, I'm figuring it out. That's what I'll say. There's a couple things that I'm wanting to do outside of, say, just like Long Beach State associated, that I am looking to work with Dr. Cotter and Dr. Schick on. But I don't know, as far as now, I don't know if I have an answer for that. Sorry to disappoint. What did you guys say, Dr. Schick and Dr. Cotter?
Well, I'm sure that you're like us. Your achievements are basically through the eyes of our students. I mean, that's essentially what both Dr. Cotter and I shared. I think that, and Dr. Cotter brought up, every time you guys get into a program, I'm experiencing this right now with several of you. Where is Amanda?
Yeah.
Where's Amanda? There you are. You're right in the, like, Amanda just got into her PhD of choice. Like that was a huge deal for me, Amanda. Like I haven't gotten to tell you like in this way, but like that was huge for me. Because like, as Dr. Cotter said, when you guys achieve, we achieve. We're growing. Every time you guys get into a program or whatever, or you win an award, or you compete in a research competition, we're competing there with you. Trust me, we're thinking about you all day. Amanda, when you're like, when you and I were emailing basically live back and forth, because I want to know what the hell's going on, and so for sure that is, and I know Dr. Escobar is the same way, right? It's like, we want to know what you're doing. We grow along with you.
Yes, good answer. That's exactly true. No, it is. It really is. Having been here for 2 years, and now I have 2 groups of students that I've worked with and like advised and mentored directly. I'm starting to have like groups of students that are going out and doing things, and like, yeah, it's feels really good and it's really awesome. And it's like, well, that's what our job is. Like, that's what we're here to do. Despite if the university has other ideas for us, but like, that's what genuinely what we're here to do, and like what we want to do. Just like we had advisors and mentors that did that for us. And we take our experiences with their previous advisors, whether they're good or whether they're bad. And believe you me, we have horror stories of bad advisors. But taking that into, providing, I don't know, being helpful to you, being of service to you guys is ultimately what it is. And I recently sent an email to our department chair recently referencing something that my advisor said is, what my advisor said, told me during my PhD, and we didn't get along very well at all. We get along now, we're fine, but I was kind of a jerk to him. But he used to say that, when you work with a student and then they go off and do their own thing, and if that student goes off and works with other students or just goes out into the field and does other things, you're adding to the family tree within the field of our area and the field of science that you can track up all the way back up to, like, at some point the Harvard fatigue lab with DB Dill or, A.V. Hill, right? So that's something that I've learned to really enjoy as a faculty member that I really didn't think about as a PhD student. So.
Ryan, go ahead and shoot your question right now.
Sure. So this question is not necessarily specific to career choice or path, but it's relevant because of COVID and quarantine and all that. Are there any specific habits you guys have tried to instill within yourselves that keep you guys focused and locked in and pretty much on top of your shit?
I don't know. Are we on top of our shit? I'll start since I just got here. I keep a pretty tight schedule, maybe not in terms of agenda items and things to do, but in terms of a daily schedule. When we first went online, it's like, oh, I can sleep in a little bit more, right? So I did that for a week or two, and I was like, no, I don't like doing this. So I get up at 5 a.m. every day, Monday through Friday. And for me, I really like working in the morning when it's dark and it's quiet and there's nothing going on. So I'll either, make my breakfast and get started working, writing or prepping or whatever it is, or, I've been working on my Spanish. So I got a little Spanish app. So I do that in the morning. But waking up every day at a certain time, getting the ball rolling is something that I've come to learn for myself is important. And then I'm going back to the gym, so not missing the gym at all. Probably spend too much time there, but I got 10 months to make up. So that's one thing.
I'll chime in from a different perspective. If you're passionate about what you're doing, you will figure out a way to stay on top of your shit. I can say this because, I love what I do. I think about it all the time. And if I wasn't in this career, I'd still be learning and reading about physiology and resistance training and performance and those sort of things, because that's who I am. That's what I want to do. And I think that's an important thing for you guys to consider moving forward and what career path you want to go to, because there will be some nuances with whatever path you choose, but it doesn't matter if you're passionate about it, because you can't help but think about that stuff anyways. And I think that's the biggest factor involved. You could, use organizing and all these different tactics to make sure you're keeping on top of everything. My little son's down here in my corner. That's the fan. That's right. But if you're not passionate about it, that's only going to go so far. And I can speak about this directly because, you know, my wife is not passionate about what she does. And she's always stressed out and, you know, rushing to get things done and just all crazy. I think passion's the biggest thing.
I'll pull both those answers together. The bottom line is find yourself a career that makes you want to get up early, that makes you want to keep a tight schedule. That's the best thing you can do for yourself. I think that the three of us are lucky enough that we've found our passion. So we can't wait to start the day. We can't wait for our first meeting with students, not with faculty, notwithstanding. That's not a part of this, but we love meeting with you guys. We like anything that's relating to you guys. So if it's research, teaching, mentorship, that's all the stuff that drives us to get up early and keep going and keep going and keep going. So you know, I hate to make this all about like life growth or whatever, but that you guys who are in grad school and you guys who are in your, you know, third year, fourth year, you're getting to that point where you need to brainstorm what it is that you feel passionate about. Because if you are able to find what you are passionate about, you'll never really work a day in your life. Like Dr. Cotter said, I know lots of people, lots of my friends, I hate what they do, including my brother. He hates what he does. But this is good stress, Noah. This is stress. If you can't withstand this type of stress, then you're not cut out for life. My brother hates what he does, and he wears it on his face. He wears it in his posture, and he has a good job. He's got a great job, but he hates it. I have another friend hates their career, and it follows that buddy of mine around wherever he goes. So the biggest motivating factor for keeping healthy habits, keeping your shit together, so to speak, is to find what you love. And that is unfortunately not easy to do. It's hard to find what you love, especially in a major where it's kind of nebulous, right? Who was I talking to earlier today? Amanda, I was talking to you about this. You guys are in a major. You're in a major, unfortunately, that is somewhat nebulous, right? Unless you're damn sure you want to do physical therapy, because then you can hopefully get into physical therapy school to be a physical therapist. But if you don't want to do physical therapy and you don't really know that you want to do a PhD, then what are you going to do? That's hard. It's hard to figure out what you're going to do. I would say that part of the job that the three of us do is to help you through that. So if you guys want to sit down and pick our brain or you want to ask more questions on this Zoom, I guess this is why we're doing this, then ask those questions. How can you narrow down what it is that you like? The caveat to that is that you're never too old to change. You're never too old to change. Don't be cynical. I hate cynicism in life. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a wholesome person. I'm saying that because cynicism prevents you from doing what you like, doing what you love. You're never too old to change. I've had that conversation with numerous people that you shouldn't be so inflexible in life. You're never too old to change. I have plenty of older students who are giving it another go. They're giving it a second go. So I've got students who are almost my age, and I give them career advice too. And I can tell you that, you know, I've got former students who are older than me who are really, really thankful that they went back to school. So if you're killing yourself right now, stress-wise, with what you're going to do, some of that is good. You should, but you should also know that you've got a lot of years ahead of you. As long as you get vaccinated. If you get vaccinated, you will have a lot of years ahead of you. So get vaccinated. But it's a big thing finding what you want to do. I hate to say it, but I also love to say it, because when you find what you want to do, it's glorious. Sorry for that ramble.
You have the best rambles. Evan the Rambler Schick.
I feel like every time, Dr. Escobar, I feel like every time I ramble, I can feel like 7 more gray hairs pop up on each side of my temple.
I'll just add something to what Dr. Schick was saying and make it more specific to maybe your guys' experience right now as students, either undergrads or grad students. Find what you like and what you enjoy in this area of study. Like, you all got into this area presumably because you're interested in it, right? And like for me, and I know Dr. Schick and Dr. Cotter probably as well, like when we're actually interested in the stuff that we teach and the stuff that we research and the stuff that we write about. And like when I'm making a new lecture, like I get really excited. Like I enjoy it. Finding new papers, I'm going to cite this, I'm going to put this together, things like that. And, if you've had me as a professor, that I like having discussions and article readings and things like that. And the idea there is for you to be exposed to more things than I can get, say, in the lecture, and have you contribute to the topic or the content, right? Because we can't cover everything in a given class or a given scope or a given area of the field, because we have a pretty broad field, right? And so I like to bring in, research articles that we don't speak directly to in class, but the idea is like to show you that, oh, there's more to this topic than what we're covering in class. And hopefully maybe that sparks some of your interest. So what I would say is, do get into the literature, get into the research of things that interest you, that relate to different classes or just different topics. And then, because honestly, I love it when one of you in class tells me something I don't know about something. I freaking love it. Okay. It's awesome. So I would say that, finding a passion, finding what you like, but do that right now as a student on your own. Right. And so don't just make what we provide for you in class like your only exposure to, say, the topic or an area or the literature. Like, go and find the thing that you like that maybe we touched on, and then go out and find more about it. Because for me, that's how I really got into like the area that I research and am interested myself. It's like, oh, that's interesting, I'm going to go look into that. And that kept me personally invested throughout. So that's something you can do right now as students.
One like last thing on that too, don't be afraid of trying something that initially doesn't look that interesting to you or feel that sexy or anything like that. I remember when I was exposed to space physiology in my first physiology class as a grad student, and I really wasn't that interested in it, to be perfectly honest. And then for my postdoc, I was kind of thrown into that with major researchers that have played a huge role in that area, and ended up really loving it. But I really had to be open to that. So make sure you're being open to that too, okay? Those are my favorite words to hear, by the way.
Y'all are so wholesome. You're making me wish I wasn't a sports psych student. But on that note, though, I did kind of want to move on to something maybe a little bit more fun. And I just want whoever answers first, really quick, don't think about it too hard. But we all know how passionate you are about, exercise phys and stuff. But if you were forced to leave exercise phys and had to pick between sports psych and motor control, which one would it be and why?
Why is mathematics not an option?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
That's messed up.
Sorry, Dr. Reed.
Because
Let's
they
go
were all
skydive.
picking it.
Go skydive with Dr. Valenzuela.
I'll be the first one. I'll say sports psych, because I do realize that psychology is a huge part on whether or not someone's going to be successful.
Doc, you muted yourself.
Or Jaden, maybe Jaden muted you.
Jaden is on my keyboard. So I don't know how much you heard, but I said sports psych. And the reason that I would choose sports psych is because I realize how important psychology is, whether or not it's sport performance, your career, XYZ, you name it, psychology plays a big factor in that. And I would probably go into like neurobiology of psychology and that sort of thing, but that would be my choice because it is such a huge factor. I love physiology, I love learning about it, but you know, if I'm honest, I think a lot of people, their limitations are more psychological based than physiological based, my personal opinion. Okay.
Dr. Valenzuela, cover your ears, look away. It's sports psychology for me, 100%. I think that, especially recently, working with Dominique on her thesis, I guess I always knew this, and some of you may know I was a psychology major in college anyways. And in fact, I started my master's program as a sports psychology person. And then working with Dominique and her studies it's become psychology. It's what it is. It's a psychology study. And I freaking love it. I'm so into brainstorming stuff with her because it's just so interesting. I love behavioral sciences. I always did. It's why I was a major in it. If I would go back in a heartbeat if I could. And I would do psychology if it was the choice between motor control and psychology. Psychology informs every last thing that we do, everything. And certainly to what Dr. Cotter talked about with neurobiology, I love neurobiology. So I'm a hormones guy, metabolism guy, so I would probably take it into that direction.
Dr. Schick, you have the best psychology and the best hormones, so you're doing well.
I may have the best psychology, but hormones, I'm gonna beg to differ. The old physiology machine over here is decaying.
I would say I like, as you know, if you've had me as a professor, I very much am interested in the evolutionary aspects of things. So I'm very interested in evolutionary psychology. So I'd probably go some psychology with an evolutionary lens. So read my meme paper because I touch on that.
You know, despite all these guys going to the psychological avenue and ignoring, you know, the rest of us, I would go to the nutrition avenue. So I would come to you guys. Hurts that you wouldn't come to me.
That's fair, Doc. It's good to have you on here, by the way.
Yeah. So this is random. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I just want to say, Dr. Valenzuela, I reference you often in class. Whenever I talk about anything like related to physics or biomechanics or like rigid levers, I always say, oh, Dr. Valenzuela would be so proud of me right now. The body is rigid levers. And I do this like I'm doing TikTok.
I would, minus the TikTok part. If you could cut that nonsense out, I would feel about those.
So what I was going to say is earlier, Noah and I were talking about how, you know, a lot of folks refer to Dr. Schick, Dr. Escobar, and Dr. Cotter as like the triangle of power. But, you know, Dr. V also is a pillar within the kin department. Like, how would you guys feel if it became like a diamond of power with biomech thrown in there?
Dr. V is the only other person that I trust besides these two. I'm here for it.
I already got diamond hands, so that works.
I want to know about these diamond hands. I'm curious.
Oh, GameStop, bro. Stonks.
Which language was that?
Courtney owes me $5. I bet her $5 Escobar would bring up something related to the stock market in this meeting. So you owe me $5.
What's your Venmo, bro?
Yep.
Okay, so we've heard. I'm sorry, go ahead, Dr.
No. Yeah, it's unfortunate Dr. Valenzuela is in another lab. He always keeps a close orbit around the three of us, and yeah, we're glad we're here. He's here. Yes.
So we've thrown a lot of questions at you guys, but let's open it up to our members again. We talked a lot about career, but does anyone have anything non-career related? We can go that way as well. Oh, Daniel, perfect. You already know where I'm going with it. Okay, so in terms of training, how can one increase their vertical jump?
The shoes, the platform shoes, the plyo shoes. Remember those from the 90s?
The moon shoes? With the
Seinfeld.
springs in them?
Seinfeld.
Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Escobar, Seinfeld, my friend.
You got to explain that to some of our younger members, Dr. Schick. There's a
I don't know what the hell's
gap,
wrong
to
with
be
you people. If
honest.
you're not watching Seinfeld, then I don't know why you're even on this call. Yeah, there's an episode where one of the main characters, George, he hooks up with this dude, not reproductively, but like for career. He hooks up with this dude, and he tries to help him sell these shoes that are supposed to improve your vertical leap. And he's so bad. I can't get through this. I'm laughing too hard.
Okay, without shoes, how do you improve your vertical jump?
That's a good question. I always wanted to dunk, and I only could get a couple like hand fingers over the rim. I think generally, and any one of you, including Dr. Valenzuela, can refine this. Plyometrics is obviously going to be the key training aspect. When we talk about like in 405 or in like 552, we talk about muscular strength versus muscular power, right? Vert is hardcore muscular power. So doing training that not only is aimed at increasing muscular force, but the rate of that force production, right? So plyometrics is a good avenue to do that because it helps you learn to recruit motor units more rapidly to develop more force, in addition to like the whole stretch shortening cycle as well. So that's to get us started, I guess.
I follow along the lines of the basics, similar to what Dr. Escobar said. Things like Olympic lifts, I think, are quite effective at developing what he was just discussing. I agree that squats in the chat there, completely agree with heavy squats. Similar to a lot of what we think about with performance enhancement is overloading the movement. And I think those are really good ways of doing it in that way. I think why you see a lot of commercialized programs out there is because people have that specific goal of increasing jump height. So by presenting a program, you're getting at someone's personal goal. And so that's why you see so many different commercialized programs out there. All probably have some level of effectiveness to them. You just have to pick, a program and probably go along with it, and you will see vertical jump increase. The other thing is have good genetics.
Pick your parents, as Escobar always says.
As long as it's not me.
So Alexa, I saw Alexa just ask a question that says, it may be random, but what are the thoughts on collagen supplements? I see them everywhere and how they help with joint pain, specifically the knee joint. And as someone with knee pain, she is intrigued.
For treating knee pain and joint health and things, the data on collagen supplements is real weak. It's very weak. There's some stuff in animal models showing that it may do something, but it's not. There's not a whole lot backing it as a supplement that I'm going to tell you to go out and buy. Although it is popular, they sell it at Costco, and generally speaking, I buy anything if Costco sells it, but not this. They sell something called collagen peptide something. It's maybe the only thing I won't buy at Costco. There's theory behind why it might work, fortifying collagen fibers. The problem with all supplements, this one included, is that just because you put it into your mouth doesn't mean it makes it into the right place in your body. collagen is unfortunately one of those things that's like that. And on an anecdotal note, when things like oral glucosamine first came out, and chondroitin, 15 years ago, maybe, I told my mom to do it because she's old, and it did nothing. And she has osteoarthritis. It didn't do anything for her. I haven't really heard of anybody where they took it and then like that was definitely the thing that made it better.
Kind of want to jump in on this one because my dissertation was on cartilage degeneration and stuff like that. And so to Dr. Schick's point, this is actually a great overlap between disciplines because the ingestibles are a physiological mechanism, but the causes of all that degeneration is a mechanical mechanism. And so it can be a physiological one, depending on a whole number of issues, obviously. But you can put all the supplements into your body you want. But if your patterns are bad, you're going back downhill. And that's just the reality of it, which is probably a big issue with his mom's pattern. If she's got the osteoarthritis, it was probably mechanical based, and all the supplements are never going to save it. And so there's a huge overlap between disciplines, which I think gets ignored. And I know luckily between the four of us, because I know Dr. Cotter did some biomechanics at Ohio State, we're all open to the interdisciplinary stuff, which I think we can all agree is that's where we're going. That's the future of it. You're going to see very few isolationist labs in the future, which it should be.
You're a couple years late on this one. I did a lot of research into this because my wife has low bone density and she has some knee problems. And so I looked into that quite a bit. And there are different forms of collagen supplementation, each one with different theorized outcomes in the body. So you have to be discussing what particular collagen you're looking at ingesting. I do agree with Dr. Schick that the research is pretty lackluster in regards to effectiveness. However, there must have been something, and I was trying to look it up real quick. Again, this was a couple years ago I looked into it. There was at least one, maybe two articles that kind of swayed me in the direction of let's give it a shot. And I used the exact supplement that they used in that study. That's important to note as well. You know, that's a whole different story with supplements is, you know, you purchase a supplement and it says it's a certain supplement, but are you getting that particular supplement and the amounts, you know, that's a whole different story. So do keep that in mind. Oftentimes the research that's done will tell you exactly what they should, at least what the source of the supplement they were using. And she did use it for a while, although she doesn't anymore, because my personal opinion was supplements, most of them are overpriced for the potential end result. And that's probably one that falls into that category.
Two things. I'm gonna read Daniel's question here in a second, but I know that many graduates or undergraduates specifically are looking to do PT with their exercise science degree, like the triangle, soon to be the diamond, said earlier, that there's a variety of career options you guys should be thinking about and hopefully thinking about pretty soon. But most of us tend to go PT direction. You will do nothing but benefit if you stick closely to Dr. Valenzuela, because PT is largely mechanical based. Yes, you need to understand the physiology and all that stuff, but they do nothing all day but correct abnormal mechanics. And if you stick closely with Dr. Valenzuela, you'll get a really good basis of that, and PT school will love it. So if you're thinking that way, just reach out to Dr. V. I just wanted to throw that out there. And then Daniel asked a great question. What are you guys' thoughts on KT tape and pain relieving cream, such as Icy Hot? Are they effective? Are they placebos, or are they just scams?
I think the important thing would be to, anytime you ask a question, is something good or does something work? It's like, you got to define your outcome variables. Like, what do you mean by, is it good? What is the measure, right? What are you actually interested in that thing affecting? I used to talk about this a couple years ago when I was teaching a class at UNM during my PhD. But there was a review paper, so it's a couple years old now. And by and large, there wasn't too much of an effect in terms of, I think, like pain or recovery or performance, right? So I'd be interested in what you all have read or heard. But the one thing I'll say is for sure, it's not going to do all the things that it says that it does, right? Because there's a whole list of things that like lymph fluid exchange or whatever, or, whatever, like random long list of things. If one of those things work, that's one thing, but for all of these things to work by a single mechanism would be quite a feat. I think the one thing I was compelled by, and I'd like to get Schick, Cotter, and Valenzuela's feedback on this, is if it does, maybe it could provide some benefit in terms of like maybe movement, because it would pull the skin up, and there are receptors like subcutaneous receptors or something like that that might give an extra bit of feedback. So it may increase some kinesthetic awareness because you might feel a little bit of tension. But other than that, that was one thing. Like maybe there's something to that, but by and large, I don't think there's much to it. But I'm happy to be wrong about that.
I know that a lot of PT clinics use it for just what Dr. Escobar said, feedback, because you can't feel your skin stretch all that well all the time, but you can feel the tape stretch because it's pulling on your skin. So it becomes a whole new receptive feedback element. So especially with kids, especially in the pediatric clinics, they use that pretty frequently. Not for any of the alleged benefits that they give. And again, I don't think those are all that well researched at this point, but they do give a lot of tactile and sensory feedback, which goes back to the motor control aspect. And it also goes to the psychological aspect that we talked about earlier. If it's a placebo, great. If it's not doing any harm, go for it. It costs more money, it takes some time, but there is something to be said for the psychological effect that you get out of certain things.
I'm somewhat biased to this. As some of you know, the four of us serve as professional reviewers for scientific journals, and the worst manuscript that I ever had to review for a journal was one on KT tape. All the results were null. The purpose of the study made no sense. And it was one of the worst written pieces of garbage I've ever had to review in my life. So that kind of colors my opinion a little bit, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. To Dr. Valenzuela's point about it providing a type of psychological feedback, I think that could be a real thing. I'm not super familiar with the data in that realm, but it does make sense to me that it can provide, if nothing else, a psychological feedback. I have had it done to me once. I had KT tape applied to my lower back. I have a herniated disc, and so I go through periods where it'll spasm really, really bad. I had KT tape applied to my back, and passively speaking, it did nothing. But it did make me more aware of my posture. So one of the things that it got me to do is it got me to do more abdominal work, which turned out to be the actual fix, not the KT tape. So I think that there is something behind certainly the feedback loop that it can provide. And then to something else that Dr. Valenzuela said, which I think is sort of the bigger idea, and it's something that Dr. Cotter and I have talked about many times, is that if it's not hurting you, if any supplement isn't hurting you and it's not draining your wallet, and you think that it's providing you a benefit, yes, at least the psychology behind it. If you think it's providing you a benefit and it makes you feel good, it makes you happier, then do it. As long as it won't hurt you and doesn't make you poor, if you think it's helping, then do it.
This is all great stuff, so I won't say too much more. I think the awareness thing is probably the biggest factor with the KT tape. I reviewed one in July, Dr. Schick, that was not great either. It did get published though, because I was only one of the reviewers. And I'm looking at it right now. It was on the effect of delayed onset muscle soreness. It did seem to have an effect. yet they had no physiological explanation for why that is the case, which just makes me feel like, oh, okay, you know, that's weird. In fact, it increased creatine kinase afterwards compared to the control group. What does that mean? Who knows? It was one of those things where I'm like, I can't make sense of this. But think about this too. When we try to look at research for helping us decide, you know, the answer to a question, and this one is KT tape defective for whatever reason. This is something very hard to control for, right? For one of my concerns was, you know, you're applying the tape at a certain, what word did they use? A certain tension or something like that, with 5 to 10% tension. And I asked the question, how did you determine 5 to 10% tension? What does that mean, you know? And that can be very difficult to control for, especially in relation to, you know, how do you just apply tape then? Do you just apply tape without tension, which I don't think they did. You know, to see if that awareness is there, but without the proposed tension that's correcting for some of the, you know, the muscle imbalances or biomechanical imbalances that might be going on. So it's a very difficult thing to study as well. So we need to keep that in mind. But long story short, I think Dr. Schick makes the best point here is that if it doesn't hurt and it's making you feel good and it's not breaking the bank, then go for it.
I'll just add one more thing. So I pulled up a little quick search. And so, for example, it says it is going to reduce swelling, reduce scar tissue, increase muscle activity, reduce pain, improve muscle contraction, improve healing, whatever the hell that means, improve nerve receptors, and improve posture, right? That's a long list of things. Like, by what mechanism? By one little sticky thing of tape on the skin? Like, probably not, bro, right? So I think it's important to, like I said, and we kind of said here, like, maybe it's good for one thing, maybe it's good for that, right? But at the same time, you got to think, and look, you're going to have either bachelor's degrees or master's in exercise science or exercise physiology and nutrition, right? You should, after coming out of these programs, be able to look at advertisements like this, products like this, and be able to use, like I have said in classes before, looking through a physiological lens, like, does this make sense? Is this possible or plausible, right? Use your background knowledge in the area of your study of exercise science, exercise phys, to help you determine what is BS and what is not BS, right? So that's one thing that I think some students, when they graduate, they don't do a whole really good job of that. But like, use the knowledge and the skills and the tools that you acquired during your education and use them in the real world. This is a perfect example for that. And then also, like I said, improves healing. What the hell does that mean, right? Use your knowledge in physiology and your education to, like, ask the question, yeah, what does that really mean, right? Define your terms, because people, companies, advertisement, whatever, will hide behind the vagary of language, right? And you have to know, like, what are you actually saying, right? And hopefully when you leave our programs, you actually have a background to understand what is actually being meant, right? And to determine if it's BS or not.
Oh, sorry, Elise. One second. Let me ask this one question. Somebody put it in the chat a little while ago. Elizabeth asks, given the COVID situation and the fact that all conferences are online this summer, do you guys have any advice on finding potential PhD advisors and creating a dialogue without the important face-to-face interaction?
I'm going to stop the triangle / diamond, whatever geometric figure we're currently on. And I think we have two better sources here. We have Amanda and we have Alejandro, who are entering into PhD programs, and they did so during the pandemic. So I would like to volunteer them to speak forward about how they were able to develop these relationships in this environment. Sorry, guys, putting you on the spot.
Kick it off, Amanda.
Okay. So when I saw your question, my first answer in my head was ask for a Zoom meeting. Email them. Sometimes they will, like, offer, like, hey, do you want to have a Zoom meeting? Other times you can just start a little bit of a conversation, but try to touch base or ask if they're taking students. For me, when I applied, I was starting to ask in September, October for like early winter application deadlines that span from November to February. So I just wanted to ask like ahead of time, and then the ones that said they were taking students, I would just check in with them a little bit later and definitely like talk to them in a Zoom meeting. And then that way you can kind of get a sense of the vibes. Like, do I like talking to them? Do they seem excited and passionate? And then find out everything you can about the program from the websites and from like the graduate coordinators. Other than that, like I felt like I got a pretty good feeling of the different schools just by talking to the graduate coordinators and the faculty of interest. But yeah, I think, I mean, for most of these schools, they're out of, actually all the schools were out of California. I wouldn't have been able to see them in person anyways.
Yeah, and so even before you start reaching out through email, to find an advisor that you'd be interested in working with, you can take the approach of starting with your research interests and then seeing who's doing research on that topic. And then from there, you see what universities they're at, see if anyone else, other faculty at that school are doing similar things. And then that's how you can kind of see like, who do I even want to work with? Where do I even want to go? Kind of just by leading with your research interests. But yeah, Amanda summed it up.
Alejandro, you also spoke to grad students, did you not?
Yeah, that's down the line. Like after you talk to the advisor, they're usually they usually offer. They're usually the ones to offer like to set up a meeting with the grad students, and so that's really helpful because you can kind of ask them different things. You can see this perspective of someone that's like going through the program, seeing what the environment's like. So that's also a really important meeting to have.
I think that's super important because you could have a potential faculty advisor that looks great on paper, super good at getting research out there, lots of grants, whatever it is. But it's like hell working for them. I can tell you for sure, because I was at UCI. There was this professor there in the same area that I was in. And I always saw this one girl in the hallway all the time. She was super nice. She always smiled at me. I ended up talking to her one day. I said, how are you doing in this lab? She kind of got down a little bit. She's like, I hate it. It's like, what do you mean you hate it? She's like, we have to come in on holidays. We have to come in on Sunday. We have to come in early in the morning. And I feel like she does it on purpose, you know, and like just as a power thing. And I was like, why don't you go somewhere else? She's like, oh, well, I'm trying to get productive stuff done here, you know? So she was okay with that. But if you're not, then keep that in mind, because if you hate it so much, I have had students that have quit their PhD route that they were going on and they ended up doing something else. And there's nothing wrong with that, but they was kind of similar. They weren't getting along with their mentor, and that's a huge thing. So not only the productivity, but also make sure you get along with them. You should enjoy going into their office and chatting with them, and they should be there for you with your best interests in mind. And you will only learn about that with communication. And if they're unwilling to communicate, you've just eliminated someone from your potential faculty list, because remember, you're also interviewing them. And I think that's an important thing too. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, real quick, Dr. Schick. This all applies to the conference too. So you see someone at the conference that's talking, you'll kind of get maybe how they answer questions. I'll give you one last example. I'm so sorry, Dr. Schick. I remember seeing some big hitters at like my first conference. It was a biomechanics conference actually. And I remember these two researchers I read a lot about, and I was like, oh my goodness, one of them's giving a talk. I can't wait to go in. And he was an asshole, let's just say. And I was like, I was so let down because I couldn't wait to hear from this. The way he answered questions, I was like, oh, geez, the last person I want to work with. I can't. This is being recorded, so I can't say.
I'm gonna text you.
You can text me later. I was just like, that was such a letdown, and that's happened multiple times with these people I was so excited to see, and then all of a sudden, it's like, yeah, I don't want to work with that person at all. So, yeah, keep that in mind, Dr. Schick. I'm so sorry.
No. What I was gonna say was directly related. I had two run-ins with two separate potential PhD advisors where I had really pedestaled them basically through my master's program. And when I met each one of them at separate conferences, and it wrecked me because they were huge assholes. So you need to choose your advisor really, really carefully. And I'm gonna just kind of circle back to the point of talking with former graduate students. That I had that role when I was in Ohio in my PhD, because I did not get along with my mentor, my PhD advisor. I thought he was a major asshole. He sort of misrepresented himself when I interviewed with him. And then when I became his senior doctoral student, he let me, it was a terrible choice by him, he let me talk to his prospective PhD students that would come in and tour the lab. And I finally got the chance to tell them firsthand, yo, don't come here. I don't know what you got to do, but you don't come here. My life is a living hell and you don't want to be me. I did that at least half a dozen times. And so he missed out on a lot of students because of me. So that's a really important thing. Amanda, I had a real quick question about your process. When you interviewed for UAB, it was like a group, part of it was like the group interview. Is that correct?
No.
Or with other prospective it was with other prospective students, is that right?
For COVID, interviewing during the COVID times, which I don't know if that'll be the same next year, but we all met in a breakout room, or we had a room together, and then we just had like a group session just to talk and get to know each other a little bit. But then I had 7 interviews and they were all individual. And then we had like one other event that was just like meeting the current students, and that was all together. But yeah.
For anybody going to like PhD or even just master's level graduate school, be really sure that they are not great for you, not a great fit for you, because full disclosure, when I was in 301 with Dr. Cotter, Dr. Schick came in to do a little presentation and he scared the crap out of me. Like, I thought he was so scary and so like, untouchable. And I was like, oh my God, this guy seems kind of mean. Maybe I shouldn't get close to him. And that was a mistake. That was a mistake because I didn't know him. And I just fully assumed off of one interaction, one presentation he gave. And I was like toward the back of the class. But upon getting to know him, I refer everybody to these 3 and to Dr. V, because they're all great and they can seem really scary. So now I'm talking to all you undergrads. They can seem really scary when you first take a class with them or whatever, but they're really not. They're not scary. They're all good people and will help you as long as you put in the work to help yourself. That's all there really is to it. I just wanted to throw that out there.
I'm just gonna take a different approach or answer here. During my PhD, I was the asshole to my advisor. So I went to work with someone, they left, and I was advisorless for like a year and a half. And then this guy came on, I started working with him, and we just did not gel very well. His demeanor was our demeanors did not gel very well. And so, and I think I've said this before, but like during my dissertation proposal, like I started yelling at him. Not because, well, it was bad. I was right, but I still shouldn't have done that. So it does matter, like personalities, because you're going to work with this person for potentially a couple of years, right? I've since apologized. We're good now. It's like, hey man, I'm sorry, I was an asshole. I was, so we're good now. But it goes to show that having the right advisor plays a really, really big role. So actually, I'm interested to know what Fabiano said to Dr. Cotter and Dr. Schick on my interview, the interview process.
Really quick, Elise, you've had a question for a while. Go ahead and rattle it off.
Thank you. So I recently learned last semester, doing some research for an assignment that I had, that the acronym RICE, which this guy, Dr. Gabe Merkin, coined, which is the famous, term that we use for rice, when it comes to like acute or like soft tissue injuries. He recanted this statement and he said, throw the whole thing away. Basically, nobody should do it. And now there's, suggestions in regards to like meat, mice, meth, which I think is a terrible acronym name, and so many other things when it comes to like treating these. And so I just want to know what's you guys' opinion. Like, do you guys stand by a certain acronym, and or what's your opinion in regards to, you know, this topic here?
Dr. V, you're currently experiencing some trouble. Maybe you can help us with that one.
Meth all the way. I don't know what meth means. That intrigues the crap out of me. I really do want to know what that one means.
It stands for like, don't quote me directly, but I think it's movement, elevation, traction, and something. T is traction, H is, I'll look it up right now. I'll let you know.
I'm sure the ending is smoking meth. It's got to be. It's in the name.
The only logical conclusion. That being said, I know the ICE is still getting a lot of run, especially at the acute trauma level. So basically, because I had my surgery last week, and post-operatively, that's basically the first thing they slap on still is throw on some ice just to diminish some of the flow. So they still have me doing that periodically. Now it wanes over time, but they keep me compressed for 6 weeks, basically. So the compression element is still in play. Now, granted, this is basically a full Achilles rupture surgery, so it's, you know, not a minor muscle issue. So that could be slightly different. And I know there's a lot of aspects of promoting the movement or the low intensity recovery exercise or whatever they're calling it. I know that's getting some traction, but I don't think that you can just blanket say we have to use this acronym for every injury. It's such a broad spectrum that that's way too hard, you know, except for the meth. I'm fully behind that one. It's way too hard just to say, this is the way we do it for everything, because tendons are different than ligaments, are different than muscles, are different than bones. They're all going to respond differently. They all have different physical properties. They all have different physical makeups, all of which respond to all of these stimuli in completely different ways.
Dr. Valenzuela, did you skydive without a parachute or something to tear your Achilles or what?
No, you die if you do that. No, it was a bone spur growing into the Achilles tendon that I had fractured playing soccer, and I partially ruptured the Achilles. And so, you know, had a ton of fun. It's because I don't have the beard power you guys have. I need to work on that.
I can't say too much on this topic. I really haven't looked into it that much. But I think Dr. Valenzuela made a really great point. It really depends on the injury, I would say. You know, I would actually like to know, does anyone know, is there any research out there that's really compelling one way or the other? I feel like this is an area that's been around for such a long time, but there's not really great research on it, surprisingly.
I missed a little bit. Sorry, I had to make a quick bathroom break, but I believe we're still on the rice question, correct? Okay, so for those of you who
I have a question now, we changed it.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool. Then I'll stop talking. No, but for those of you who I haven't spoken to at length, I actually used to be a functional rehabilitation specialist for 4 years, which is similar to physical therapy, but different. I didn't need the schooling for it. And it's more geared toward, surprisingly, returning people to physical activity and athletics, sports. And to be honest, it's surprising to learn that a lot of the practices in sports medicine, or even, well, not really medicine, but sports medicine, are not as backed by scientific findings and studies as you might think. Even in the textbooks itself, for the things I had to learn for this job, many tests that you get done, if you get hurt or whatever, if you've been over therapy and whatever, it'll tell you how to do the test, who found the test, how it works, what it tells you if the test is positive or negative. But many times it'll say support is absent in the literature, which means, hey, we do this because we think it works, but there's no really support for it. So things like the Rice method or whatever might be new out there. And as you guys have already seen with like fitness influencers and stuff, people kind of just do things, and whatever works, they tend to kind of stick with that for a while, and until it gets so something new and popular shows up, they kind of just stick with that. So that doesn't really, I don't answer your question, Elise, but the point is that Actually, I think I lost my point. I think I just wanted to share that it's not always supported in the literature and people just do things. So watch out.
Yeah, so look at this, guy. So in PubMed, I just searched for rice and the title and abstract and included rest ice compression elevation anywhere else. The best thing I got was in 2012. What is the evidence for rest ice compression elevation, specifically to ankle sprains? Insufficient evidence. And that's it. There's really like not 2007, there's a little thing, 2001, crazy, right? That there's this should be some motivation, at least for some people out there that aren't sure whether or not they want to get out there and do research. We know a lot, but there's way more we don't know.
For those of us who might be looking for research topics, there you go. We only have about 30 minutes left. It is 6:25, and there are 3 questions in the chat that I want to get to. Fanny, Brittany, and I believe Elizabeth, you all ask questions. I don't want to feel like you're being ignored. So really quick, I'm going to shoot Fanny's question to follow up with the COVID question. Given the variety in symptoms and severity levels for individuals who tested positive, what would you guys suggest as the best approach when returning to physical activity? More specifically, for those individuals who are diagnosed with pneumonia, what would you recommend for their activity levels?
Can you repeat that question one more time, Courtney?
Sorry.
I don't mind going first. That was a long one, and I think I may have gotten. I pulled a no and I got lost.
Schick.
I also
in the
talk,
chat.
Yeah, I also talk fast, but I will read it one more time. Given the variety in symptoms and severity levels for individuals who have tested positive, what would you all suggest as the best approach to returning to physical activity, specifically for those who are diagnosed with pneumonia?
Pneumonia is nothing to mess around with. The first thing you need to do is get checked out by your doctor and get him to sign off on a return to physical activity. That's the very first thing you'd have to do. Pneumonia takes a lot out of you, and it depends on if you have scarring of lung tissue, because pneumonia can have lasting effects because it can scar lung tissue. So have very low expectations of yourself when you're returning to exercise. Assume, because you most likely will experience this, that if you actually had pneumonia, especially if it was a large pneumonia, there's varying degrees of pneumonia, but if it was a large pneumonia, it's going to take a long time to recover your pulmonary function. I mean months. If it was a medium-sized pneumonia, assume several weeks, if not a month or even longer. If it was a small pneumonia, at least weeks still, if not a month. It varies, but pneumonia can really impart very, very lasting effects. Lung tissue is hard to heal. It is not like the liver. It's hard to regenerate, and it's easy to scar. It's an easy tissue to scar. And pneumonia has a way where if it's bad enough for long enough, it can scar that tissue. The only way you know whether you've induced that type of thing is to get a chest CT scan, or at least an X-ray. But suffice to say, have low expectations of yourself. If you've come down with symptomatic COVID, have low expectations of yourself. Don't try to sit out in here and run right away or exercise vigorously. You'll fatigue extremely quickly, and it'll make you feel like you're 90 years old. And this is with getting out of the period of positive tests. You may have a negative COVID test for weeks, but the effect of pneumonia is long lasting. So start off very, very small, very, very low expectations, and very small. Simple walking can be difficult, but is probably appropriate. If you notice yourself coughing, you need to understand that if you're coughing still, you may still have an active pneumonia. You at least may have an active immune response. And so if you have like a productive cough where you're you're coughing up sputum from your lung, which is really common following pneumonia, then, just take it easy. Exercise is not necessarily a bad thing if you're coming off pneumonia, because that movement actually can help you expectorate some of that sputum that might be stuck down there from pneumonia. But it's going to be hard to exercise. It's really hard to exercise when you're still coughing. So start slow, start low, walking, and just taking it easy, and really making sure that you're nutritionally good, because COVID has a way of messing up your entire body. So making sure that your nutritional status is up to date, I'll say, it would be also super important. And then keeping yourself hydrated. If you're coming off COVID and it was a symptomatic COVID with pneumonia, you need to do a good job of staying hydrated too. Dr. Cotter just posted a link in the chat with some guidelines. So there's also that. So please take a look.
Brittany asks in the chat, what are your guys' thoughts on mechanical physical healing progression from an injury or surgery if the patient suffers from depression or is not in, quote, the right mindset? Basically, do you guys think the patient's physical progression timeframe can significantly improve if mindfulness or some aspect of psychology is incorporated into their physical therapy?
I hate to do this again, but can we get that question repeated? You know the old ticker, Noah, the old ticker. She ain't what she used to be.
Basically, how do you guys, what are your guys' position on if improving a patient's mindset with psychology therapy or mindfulness therapy in addition to their physical therapy will improve their physical recovery or recovery time frame?
Can I ask for a slight clarification on that? Is the question asking about whether mindfulness will produce a physiological effect that will positively impact recovery, or if it's a completely separate factor, if that makes sense?
So this is Brittany. So I guess what I'm specifically thinking about is actually in regards to, I guess, one of the interests that I'm thinking about with going into PT and whatnot. So I was thinking about combining yoga therapy, which is spiritual aspects and, mindfulness, whatnot, with physical therapy. And I'm wondering the thoughts on how like that type of being in a certain mindset can actually progress further. Does that kind of make sense?
I'll speak first, I guess. From a simple response, I think the aspect of mindfulness is probably a positive aspect in all factors in life. This is coming from someone, I talked to some people about this, like I've dabbled in meditation ever since I was a teenager for various reasons, and I'm currently getting back into it with an app through Sam Harris, who is has doctoral training in neurology and that sort of neuropsychology. I don't know what it exactly is, but I really like his stuff. And just in general, I think, yes, I would have to imagine that if someone has practiced mindfulness or has experienced the beneficial effects of practicing mindfulness, it would have to have some positive effect, whether psychological or physiological. I know that's not a specific answer, but I think in a generality, that's a good outcome for anyone to partake in, or would provide beneficial outcomes in any situation if they are partaking in mindfulness. Just my opinion.
The psychological aspect is huge for adherence. So a big part of rehab is adherence and actually doing things. And so if you're highly depressed, you're not doing anything. So the mindfulness comes into play big time from that. So, I mean, it helps with the healing process. Does it physiologically or mechanically actually help? No, not exactly. But it helps you kind of stay up with the program. One of my good friends, actually, she's an occupational therapist, and she wrote an entire book on yoga for kids in occupational therapy. So it's specific to children, specific to the psychological, well, the mental side of yoga, as well as the physical side of what she does from an occupational therapy standpoint. She's actually located in the South Bay area. So she highly believes in that. She teaches yoga training specific to rehabilitation people every single year, all over the place. So there's a lot to be said for the psychological factors when it comes to that rehabilitation process. Whether or not there's an actual physical effect on it, no, probably not from as far as what we sort of study, but there definitely is from that adherence side. So I think taking it from that holistic point of view is huge for that from that perspective. And I know her book focuses on a handful of those aspects specifically.
This has got me thinking, so I want to jump on what Dr. Valenzuela said. Perhaps it does have a physical effect if we think about the simple aspect of, let's just think about what we all do, and that's training. I'm assuming we all resistance train because that's clearly better than cardiorespiratory training, as we discussed early on. Imagine going in and exercising, thinking about something completely else. You're moving the weight, but you're thinking about something completely different, right? Versus you go in there, and I think we've all had these instances where you're just super focused. You know exactly what you're doing. You're in tune with the movements that are occurring. You kind of feel more of what's going on in your body, right? That's perhaps an unintentional mindfulness that someone's experiencing. And there's no data to support this or anything, but I'd have to imagine that if you have developed an ability to make that happen more frequently, if you're involved in a rehabilitation program, that perhaps that will make whatever you're doing for your rehabilitation more effective, if that kind of makes sense. You're treating it more seriously. You're actually working on each little movement with intention versus just doing it, kind of with other intentions in your mind, if that kind of makes sense.
I'm going to jump in here. I've got a couple things to say. That concept of being present for every single repetition of every single exercise, every time you work out, is more powerful than making an overly complicated program. I've said this in my strength and conditioning class time and time again, that when I teach periodization, various forms of periodization, the thing that students like to do is they like to make a program that is so insanely, wildly complicated with different types of conjugation schemes and back and forth undulation and all these things that, frankly, I can barely follow. And one of the biggest things you guys can do to help yourself is to wash out all that complication and make a simple program and be present for every single exercise, be present for every single repetition, every single time. That will allow you to progress in a much deeper and more profound and long-term way than some overly complicated program. Arnold Schwarzenegger. I know that for Dr. Cotter and myself, and maybe Dr. Escobar too, maybe Dr. Valenzuela, I don't know, but our longtime hero who really got us into weightlifting was Arnold Schwarzenegger. It kind of sounds like a joke, but it's not. It's actually true. And he used to talk about being present for every single repetition that you have to do. And that was the thing that set him apart from all of his competitors, was that he lived, breathed. It's all he thought about was weightlifting. And I want to add to that another thing. There's a book called Zen in the Art of Weightlifting. It's called Zen in the Art of Weightlifting. I read it when I was in my master's degree at Fullerton, and it talks about it talks about how weightlifting itself is meditative. It is absolutely meditative if you are doing it and you are staying present-minded while you're doing it. And it speaks to the point of thinking about every single repetition when you're doing it, thinking about every single square cubic inch when you're lifting, not letting your mind wander, keeping your focus. In that way, weightlifting is very Zen. It's very meditative, and it's a great way to train your ability to stay present, which is really, really hard. That's a super hard thing for everybody, is to maintain a present mind. The other thing, and this is more of a global psychology thing, is if you're having real psychological trauma, or certainly you want to tie it into your career, but even if, I guess I'm more talking about psychological trauma, acutely speaking, get a therapist. Don't ask us. We're not experts in psychology. None of us are psychologists. I'm a great active listener, but you know what? I'm not a therapist. I'm not actually a therapist. There are two websites that I just pulled up that I have used. I have my own therapist. I see her once a month. There are two websites. One is called betterhelp.com. Betterhelp.com. That's a newer one where you can use it to find a local psychologist. And then there's another one that I have used called psychologytoday.com. Psychologytoday.com and betterhelp.com are both great websites for finding local therapists. I think Courtney just said she reiterated what I was saying. Do that. It's a great thing you can do for yourself. It's kind of the gift that keeps on giving if you can establish a relationship with a therapist, because these are people who get to know you and they know how you tick, and it's the thing you can share with them things that you may not feel comfortable sharing with anybody else. It's a person who will listen. And I know that a lot of you don't have people in your lives who will listen to you. And so these types of people are going to be there for you. They get paid to do it. So they got to do it. Schick out.
Really quick, I want to jump in before I ask the last couple of questions that we have. Yeah, not just because I'm a sports psych student, actually my goal is to be a therapist. So I just took the kin route to stand out for grad school. But positive psychology is something that does touch on everything that Dr. Cotter and Dr. Schick just mentioned. And also a lot of the stuff I've been doing for my psych classes, positivepsychology.com has been a really good resource if that's something you want to look into. And then I also work for CAPS, so I'm not just talking out of the side of my neck. But anyways, really not anyways, but just to change it over to, I want to get to Elizabeth and Ron's questions. And then we have one more closing question that we'd really like to have you folks hear from I'm gonna actually send that to the diamond of power, whatever we're on at this point. But Elizabeth asked, as a follow-up question to the advisor question, it seems like finding an advisor that you work with is more important. Would you guys agree that working with someone that you get along with is more important than finding someone who is doing research that you're interested in? Especially given that there are not a lot of people. Okay, I guess there's not a lot of people doing the research that she's interested in. So she wants to know, is it better to find somebody she gets along with or find somebody that is doing the research she's interested in? Which would you guys pick?
Do you guys mind if I go first on this one? So my PhD advisor was doing research that I thought was like really fascinating. It was molecular physiology of diabetes, and he was working with this really cool two models. One was a mouse model and one was the cell culture model, and I got to work on both, and it was like super exciting to me. The guy was a huge asshole. I loved the research. I loved spending time in the lab. But this guy was the type of mentor I would not wish on my enemies, my worst enemies. He made my life a living hell for 4 years, and that's not an exaggeration. One of the happiest days of my life was when I got to leave that school, that program, and him. That's a very tough question. It's really complicated, and it always depends on the person who you're talking to, depends on their experience. So I'm giving you my experience. But inevitably, it's a balance of both. You have to be at least vaguely interested in the research line, the discipline, but you cannot ignore personality and whether you're going to be able to stand this person for 4 years or for 2 years if it's a master's program. That is something that is unfortunately overlooked. I overlooked it. I was a child. And I paid the price for that. So it's a balance of both. It's definitely a balance of both. You need to meet the person, vet them as best you can, make sure their CV checks out, make sure that they've published recently, like in the last year. Try to talk to a former student if you can, a current student if you can, to see what they think. I already told you guys what I used to do to prospective PhD students in Ohio. I would tell them the truth. So it's absolutely a terrible idea to choose somebody solely based on the research. At the end of the day, yes, I did get the piece of paper that I needed, but it did cause me quite a bit of the word of the night is psychology. It caused me pretty bad psychological pain that lasted a long time, a long time. I'll pass the mic.
I'll go ahead. One thing that you have to think about is, especially if it's a PhD, right, or some terminal degree, is what are you going to work with that person for? What sort of job do you want? Because there's a big difference between, say, the program that, say, we have, or even if it's a school that has a PhD, but it's not a research institution, an R1. They're very different animals. Okay, so for example, like Dr. Schick mentioned, his advisor made his life a living hell. Okay, if it depends on the program, the university, and the advisor, because if you go to like an R1, guess what? Your job is to work in the lab to do research. Like, you are a means to an end, right? Because their job as faculty are to publish, get funding, and be productive. Because if they don't, maybe they don't get tenure, right? Or maybe they don't get retained, right? So they have to produce. So they have, you're just a cog in the machine that, if it's a really good program, there's plenty of other students that would take your job, right? So there's a big difference between that and, to the best of our ability that, me and Dr. Schick and Dr. Cotter and Dr. Valenzuela have, of, we're actually interested in you as students, right? You're not just tools for us to achieve our academic goals, right? The perfect thing is when our academic goals and your goals align, and that's great, right? But if you're going to a big institution like that, and they don't care. They don't care what you're interested in. They don't care what you want to do. It's like, no, you're doing this and you have a choice. You want to get funding? You want to come back? Do you want someone else to take your spot? You're going to do this then, right? Now, it's not every institution, R1 research institution, not all faculty are like that, right? But that is definitely a possibility. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well. Like, a perfect example is, we had an opening at UNM for a faculty position. We had a candidate come. She worked at a big lab under one of the biggest researchers in the field of sports nutrition, right? She came, she presented, she gave a research presentation, and she was wholly underwhelming, right? Because her advisor told her to do everything. She couldn't answer basic questions about her dissertation. And she actually gave this answer to a couple of questions of, like, why did you do this? Or what was the rationale? Why did you do this study? Oh, my advisor told me to do this because my advisor wanted me to, right? Now, that's like a very specific case. And hopefully you can be productive and be successful by undergoing a program like that and not be completely inept like this individual was. But you have to think about, what do you want to get out of this program? If you want a big time research institution job, right, then you have to go to one of those schools and you have to publish, you have to produce if you want to be competitive for that type of position. For a position like, that's less research specific focus, like the CSU system, like for our program, like that's not as big of a thing. And my PhD experience was somewhere in between, an R1 experience and not really an R1 experience. So it matters, what kind of job do you want to get? And that will determine, okay, is it going to be worthwhile to put up with 4 years potentially of a non-ideal situation to get the thing that you want in order to get the position that you want? So you have to decide that.
I'll answer just real quick on just one more thing. Yes, the answer is it's more important, I think. Because remember, these people, if done right, will be your advocates for the rest of your life, or for the rest of their lives, because they're probably older than you and will pass away before you. But I know my mentors from UC Irvine. I remember when I took that postdoc, I originally didn't want to apply for it because it was space research. And I told you before, I wasn't really into it. And my advisor said, you'd be crazy not to want to work with these guys. And I said, all right, I'll check it out. And I chatted with my advisor the other day about some house remodeling stuff, because I consider him like my research father, if you will. He's part of my family. And we meet every once in a while to catch up, So those are the people that are going to really be in your corner for the rest of your life. So if you pick someone you work well with, that will be the person that will do that. If you pick someone that just has a good research lab, then maybe they'll get you to your next position, but that might be about it. So that's how I like to think about it, at least.
Okay, so we did have one or two more questions from Ron and Elise. Unfortunately, we're really close to the end here, and we had one big final question we kind of wanted to get all 4 answers from the diamond of power to this question. So Ron, that's a great question about, you know, exercising barefoot and if it matters or not. I would highly recommend you go to Dr. V about that, since he recently published a study on weightlifting barefoot versus training shoes. So definitely go to him. Elise, you can go to any of the diamond of power for that question. They all have a lot of knowledge on that subject. So unfortunately, we have to close it soon. So Courtney, go ahead and ask our final question.
I love that we've changed it to the diamond of power. So one last thing is kind of away from everything, is that knowing what you know now, what would you go back and tell your college freshman self? What advice would you give your college freshman self in 30 seconds or less?
I would say go to class, because my college freshman self was at a junior college and I didn't go to class ever. And I had a 1.6 GPA and I was one semester from being dismissed. And I did 4 years at a junior college and had like 120 credits, can only transfer like 70. So I wasted a good amount of time like longboarding and playing Super Smash Brothers and like going out and stuff. So I would say don't do that, or maybe not, because I ended up here. So I got my shit together after three and a half years. So I could say that. That would be my answer.
So be gracious with yourself is how I'm going to translate that.
I'll jump on that a bit. I wouldn't change a single thing. I would be silent. I wouldn't whisper a word to myself.
Chills. That actually gave me chills a little bit.
Dr. Schick, Dr. V.
A little, actually similar to Dr. Cotter. I don't think that I would tell myself to do anything differently much. I still ended up where I wanted to go. And to be honest, I think that the path I took was a path that needed to be taken. I made a lot of mistakes, but they were mistakes that I had to take. I had to do.
I think I'm closer to Dr. Escobar's pathway, so we got a split here. I think the biggest thing is ask the why question. Don't just blindly take and regurgitate information, understand it. Because if you don't understand it, it will bite you in the ass at some point. So you have to be intimately involved with everything that's coming your way. Otherwise, you're not going to succeed. You're going to end up in that same scenario that Dr. Escobar referenced of, well, why'd you do this? Because someone told me to. That ain't good enough. That's not going to fly in your professional world. So ask that why question.
Solid. So we only have about 8 minutes left, and I really quickly wanted to just thank you all for joining us today. I know Dr. V originally had said he wanted to come harass the 3 of you, Dr. Schick, Dr. Escobar, Dr. Cotter, but I love that we changed it from a triangle to a diamond now. It's also cohesive. I love it. But again, thank you so much for coming in and providing us with your insight and your knowledge, and also just like having some fun with us. I think this was a good way for everyone to get to know you folks a little better. We do have some like first and second years here who might be looking towards you guys in the future. And, you know, you guys are all really someone to look up to. Like I said, I'm a sports psych student. Like I have never gone to you guys for anything other than I went crying to Dr. V one time when I was taking biomech. So that class killed me. But you guys have all been very accepting and very warm. And I think it's just a good thing to get, you know, people to know you folks better. So thank you again. For the rest of the club members, I wanted to remind you, next week we have our strength and conditioning colloquium featuring a gym owner and a professional trainer, or I'm sorry, okay, yeah, sorry, who are coming in to talk to us next week. So if that's something that interests you, please come by and check it out and see what's going on. And we have 7 more minutes. If you want to hang out and maybe talk to the big 4, I should say, a little bit more, feel free, but you know, they do have families, they might have to go. I want to wish you all have a good night.
One last thing for everybody as a take-home message and a motto: always ask yourself when you're facing a tough decision, what would the diamond of power do? And that way you'll know what the right decision to make is.
It depends on the question.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you so much, Diamond of Power, for taking the time out to let us tug your ear. We appreciate you.